Hey everybody, Lori Spencer here. Thanks for joining me as we read After Camelot by J. Randy Taraborelli. In the last episode, we read the intro and the prologue. Today, we're diving into Chapter 1, page 8, if you're following along with a hard copy. Jackie, trying to let go of the past. Had it all been just a terrible dream? Was he really gone? Certainly there were moments, though fleeting, when it felt as if it had never happened. She would awaken in the morning, and for just a few seconds, everything in her life seemed fine. But then a bleakness would begin to set in, and in no time it would all come back to her. Yes, it had happened. He was dead. Why him? Why not her? Was there anything she could have done, should have done? And then she would cry. Sometimes just a few tears, but often racking sobs. It had been that way for years, and she feared it would remain so for as long as she would draw breath. Of course, sometimes she would have good days, but the bad days were just awful. She wasn't even 39 yet. Was this to be her fate? Would she ever recover? Indeed, those thoughts still consumed Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis in 1968, almost 5 years after the murder of her husband, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. She was born Jacqueline Lee Bouvier in Southampton, New York, on July 28, 1929, to Janet and John Bouvier III. If not to the manor born, Jackie was certainly never lacking in the accommodations that the very wealthy people of her time took for granted. Socially prominent parents, a private school education, instruction in the equestrian arts, ballet lessons, travel abroad. When one considers photographs of the 20-something Jacqueline Bouvier, a number of descriptive words and phrases spring to mind: uncommon grace, flawless taste, culture, great style, unerring charm, a sense of serenity, refinement that came with excellent breeding. By the standards of today, perhaps she would not have been considered a great beauty. Her thin lips, when stretched into a smile, revealed teeth that were anything but perfectly aligned. Her eyes appeared a bit too wide apart. She was definitely the daughter of aristocratic Blackjack Bouvier, as her features attested, and while her father was considered rakishly handsome, Jackie would have to wait for the allure of falling in love with Jack Kennedy for her beauty to come into full force. By contrast, Jackie's younger sister, by 4 years, Lee, inherited the looks of her mother's family, the Lees: aquiline nose, porcelain skin, high cheekbones, fair hair, and eyes. Jackie even acknowledged this and was quoted as saying of her younger sister, "Lee was the pretty one, so I guess I had to be the intelligent one." Arguably, the most famous years of the Kennedy dynasty started with JFK and Jackie's fabled time in the White House. It had been in November 1960 that Democratic nominee John Fitzgerald Kennedy was narrowly elected to the office of the president over the Republican Richard M. Nixon, ushering in a new and exciting era of promise and hope for the country. In many ways, JFK's victory may have had less to do with his political platform than with his star quality and his youth. At 43, the youngest man ever elected, and the second youngest to hold that office, that distinction belonging to Teddy Roosevelt, the vice president who, at 42, became president after William McKinley was assassinated. It was Jackie Bouvier Kennedy's great good fortune, and ours, that she would become First Lady, and one of America's most memorable, echoing the tenure of Dolly Madison some 150 years previously. Like 24-year-old Dolly, Jackie was, at 31, one of the youngest of presidential wives. The public was quickly captivated by her charm and grace and, yes, her beauty. Indeed, with the addition of two lively, photogenic children, Caroline and John John, the first family became everyone's ideal and captured the hearts of all Americans. But then tragedy struck in November 1963, when President Kennedy was brutally assassinated in Dallas. "Take your glasses off, Jackie," he had said to his wife, referring to her large shades. "They want to see your face." It would be his last request of her. Soon after, he would be shot dead at her side, his blood and brains splattered all over her lovely pink dress suit. She would find the loss impossible to reconcile, even after leaving the White House and moving to New York City with her children. Crushed and disillusioned, in November 1964, the one-year anniversary of the assassination, Jackie wrote of Jack, "I should have known that he was magic. I should have guessed that it could not last. I should have known that it was asking too much to dream that I might have grown old with him and see our children grow up together. So now he is a legend, when he would have preferred to be a man." All around her, life continued to unfold after Jack's death, but certainly not in ways that would help ease her grief, because it just seemed like one calamity after another. For instance, Jack's youngest brother, Ted, broke his back in a plane crash in 1964, causing some in the family to wonder if perhaps there was a Kennedy curse hanging over them, especially given that two of Ted's siblings, Joe and Kathleen, had also been killed in plane crashes. Then, unbelievably enough, another Kennedy brother was murdered, this time Bobby, on June 6, 1968. Jackie was determined to continue to live her life, though, if only for the sake of her children, and she had decided that she was going to do it with a new man at her side, Aristotle Onassis. Onassis was a bona fide force of nature, born not in Greece, but in what is now Turkey, in 1906, the same year as another force of nature, the San Francisco earthquake. The proverbial spoon with which he was born was not silver, it was platinum. His father, Socrates, was a prosperous shipping owner with 10 ships in his fleet and extensive real estate holdings, enabling him to provide Ari with a classical education at prestigious schools. Though there would always be questions about Aristotle Onassis's business modus operandi, they seemed to do little to hurt his reputation as a globe-trotting bon vivant. He would entertain potentates in politics and consort with criminal figures with equal vigor and with no apparent damage to his standing in either community. He continued to grow his worldwide shipping business by a method he once described as OPM, other people's money, forging simultaneous long-term alliances at fixed prices with such competing oil companies as Mobil and Texaco. Sailing under the duty-free flag of Panama, he turned a profit even as he charged the lowest prices in the merchant marine market. As his coffers grew, so did his holdings, shares that guaranteed his control of 95 multinational businesses on 5 continents, gold processing, airlines, and real estate investments in South America, a chemical company in Persia, a castle, apartments, a skyscraper in Manhattan, Olympic Airways, the airline he founded, ownership of Greek islands, such as his prized Isle of Scorpios, the luxury yacht the Christina, and 17 banks throughout the world. There was one acquisition he had not yet attained, however, but he was fully determined to do so. That was America's one-time First Lady. Aristotle Onassis came into the Kennedys' lives when he met Jackie and Jack at a dinner party in Georgetown in 1955, back when Jack was a senator. Shortly thereafter, Jackie and Jack visited Onassis on his famous 325-foot yacht, the Christina, named after his only daughter, born in 1954, while it was docked at Monte Carlo, and the Kennedys were in the south of France visiting Rose and Joseph. There's something damned willful about her. There's something provocative about that lady. She's got a carnal soul, Onassis said at one time. It was certainly an odd statement to make about a woman who, at least from all outward appearances, seemed anything but carnal. But that was Onassis, always provocative, always defying expectations. In 1963, Jackie and Jack suffered the tragic loss of an infant, Patrick. In order to help Jackie recover from that ordeal, her sister, Lee Radziwill, suggested that she join her and a group of friends on a cruise with Onassis. Not surprisingly, the trip garnered worldwide media attention, with an avalanche of pictures being published of Jackie and Ari touring the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, as well as Onassis's private and lush island of Skorpios. Onassis had just recently bought Skorpios, a small, barren, waterless island in the sea which he magically transformed into an earthly paradise by planting thousands of trees and other vegetation and building large estates and quaint guest houses throughout. Jackie told me she had such a wonderful time. She wished the vacation would never end, said Oleg Gassini, who designed much of her wardrobe during the White House years. Ever since that cruise, she had a soft spot in her heart for Aristotle Onassis. He had been so warm to her and so understanding of her grief. She would never forget him. Then, in early 1968, the two began to date. It was a surprise. When she told me about it, my first thought was, "Really, Jackie? That is so odd." However, what came tumbling from my mouth was, "Really, Jackie? That is so nice." When Aristotle Onassis first proposed marriage to Jackie Kennedy in the spring of 1968, she seriously considered it. She loved him, though it would probably be overstating it to say she was in love with him. She had a good time when she was with him, and he seemed to care about her and her children. She was tired of being alone. She wanted to move forward with her life and simply didn't want to spend the rest of it being cast as the nation's most celebrated widow. However, at Bobby's behest, her sisters-in-law, Ethel, Bobby's wife, and Joan, Ted's, visited Jackie at her home in New York City one afternoon to discourage her from being too hasty with Onassis. They feared that the union might jeopardize Bobby's chances of making it to the White House. As Ethel put it at the time, "For heaven's sake, don't marry him. Don't do this to Bobby or to me." Moved by their pleas, Jackie agreed to put off the wedding, at least until after the election. However, after Bobby was assassinated, she became more concerned than ever about her safety, her welfare, and especially that of her children. And that's when she famously said, "If they're killing Kennedys, my children are targets." Therefore, frightened, alone, and still traumatized by what she'd gone through in Dallas, she'd pretty much decided by her 39th birthday that she wanted to marry Aristotle Onassis as soon as possible. "You have done all the mourning that anyone can humanly expect of you," he told her. "The dead are dead. You are living." She had to agree. Still, bringing a man of such great controversy back to the so-called Kennedy compound was a big deal for Jackie Kennedy. In fact, it could have been argued that bringing any man who wasn't a Kennedy onto such hallowed ground would constitute a true act of bravery. After all, this was a place of rich, if often troubled, family history, the sanctuary to which Kennedys always retreated, not only after tragedies, but after victories as well. It was a place where they could be completely themselves, away from the media scrutiny, unless they invited the media in themselves, surrounded by their many children and loved ones. Actually, it wasn't a compound per se, just a cluster of large homes, each a sprawling white frame clapboard structure. The only actual waterfront property was Rose and Joseph's, which they purchased back in 1927. This was called the Big House by family members because, with 14 rooms and 9 bathrooms, it was the largest one in the compound. The house also boasted a movie theater, a boat dock, a swimming pool, a tennis court, a wine cellar, and several large stretches of lawn, perfect for impromptu games of touch football, as was always the Kennedys' way. Ethel's house was next door, and Jack and Jackie's nearby. Eunice and Sargent and Jean and Stephen Smith also had homes in the compound, and Ted and Joan had a house on nearby Squaw Island, which was about a mile and a half away. Jackie had enjoyed so many important family milestones with the Kennedys on this sandy stretch of Cape Cod land. Jack's election, the birth of her children, the birthdays of relatives, and of course, the sharing of great grief over Jack's death and then over Bobby's, that it felt almost sacrilegious to bring a stranger onto the property, let alone one with such a shady past. After all, she had always been a woman concerned with appearances and what was not fitting. This was more than just a matter of appropriateness, though. Indeed, the deeper meaning of bringing someone back to the compound did not escape Jackie, nor, she knew, would it escape anyone else. She realized that not only would such a move on her part signal that she was finally ready to move on, but perhaps it would also be a not-so-subtle sign to the Kennedys that maybe they should move on too, from JFK's death as well as from Bobby's. My taking Ari there is loaded with so much symbolism. That's how Jackie put it at the time. I'm not even sure how I'll react to it. It's so emotional for me. It's facing the future and letting go of the past, which is frightening. I'm so worried that the family will be upset or offended. Indeed, no matter what twists and turns her life had taken since that fateful day in November 1963, when America lost a president and she a husband, Jackie was still a Kennedy at heart, and she still cared a great deal about them. So what to do? An invitation from Rose. About a month before Jackie Kennedy's scheduled visit to the Cape to celebrate her 39th birthday, she was at her Fifth Avenue home in New York with her dear friend Roswell Gilpatrick. Gilpatrick had served in Jack's cabinet as Deputy Secretary of Defense and had briefly dated Jackie in 1967. Over dinner, Jackie explained her dilemma about bringing Onassis to the compound. I have mixed emotions, she told Roswell, according to his distinct memory of the conversation. I know I'm being silly. I feel so stupid. Nonsense, Roswell told her. You mustn't feel that way. It's completely understandable after all you've gone through. But you know how Rose is. She would want to see you, and she would want you to bring Ari. Jackie wasn't so sure. I wonder, she began, looking at Roswell with questioning eyes. Would you call her to ask? He was reluctant. I don't think it's my place, Jackie, he said. However, he changed his mind in mid-sentence, knowing full well that he could never refuse a request of hers. Okay, I'll do it, he told her. In fact, I'll do it right now. Jackie's eyes widened. Now? She asked. But I meant when I wasn't in the room, Roz. She then scurried out of the parlor, saying she couldn't bear to listen, as Roswell walked over to the telephone on a nearby end table and started to dial. It was always interesting to people who knew her well that while Jackie was ever the sophisticate in public, especially as First Lady, paradoxically she had another side to her, one that was very girlish and even incredibly shy. 10 minutes later, Roswell called out to Jackie. Okay, you can come out now, he said, laughing. It's safe. Jackie peeked around the corner into the living room. I spoke to Rose, he told her, and she was very upset. "Oh, no," Jackie said, coming back into the living room. "You see, Ross, I told you she would be cross." "No, no," he said, cutting her off. "She's only upset because she couldn't understand why I was calling instead of you. Yes, she wants you to come to the Cape for your birthday, and she wants you to bring Ari. In fact, she's even invited me." "Here," he said, handing her the telephone. "Now, call your mother-in-law." Thus it came to pass that on the afternoon of July 28, 1968, her 39th birthday, and just 7 weeks after Bobby Kennedy's murder, Jackie Kennedy found herself in the most unlikely of scenarios, back home with her family in Hyannisport, sitting on the same porch of the big house and in the same white Adirondack chairs in which she and Jack once sat while enjoying many a golden sunset. Only now, a new man was in Jack's place, Aristotle Onassis. Of course, there were awkward moments. It was only natural. But everyone was at least trying to make it work, recalled Barbara Gibson, Rose's secretary, who was present that weekend. Onassis didn't look like someone Jackie would end up with, so it was jarring when she walked through the door with him. He was much older. He wasn't really very handsome, though I must say he made up for it in sheer charisma. Compared to Jack, who had always been so stunning and elegant, well, it was like night and day. But Rose Kennedy pulled me into the kitchen and said something to me that made a great deal of sense. "If he was young and good-looking, would that make it any better?" she asked. "No," she said. "In fact, it might make it worse. As it is, he is so very different. I think it will somehow be easier to accept him into our lives." Certainly, one has to conclude that it was Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy who established the family's moral compass and the model for their purpose-driven lives. Her enduring faith, rooted in her unfaltering devotion to her Roman Catholic heritage, which she passed on to her 9 children, was like something out of the scriptures, unassailable, fervent, and about which she reminded her offspring with such passion and frequency that it became her mantra. God never gives us more sorrow, more burdens, more troubles than we can endure. Her husband, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, had ruled the family with an iron fist, strategizing the campaigns of 3 sons, saw one elected president, another become attorney general, and a third a senator, all at the same time. He was as ruthless as he was savvy, amassing a fortune over the years as a stock market and commodity investor. But now, rendered speechless and paralyzed after a debilitating stroke in 1961, all he could do was sit in a wheelchair and stare off into the distance. It was very difficult being in his presence and accepting that the man he once was no longer existed. Still, he was Dad, or Grandpa, and an important part of this family. Jackie, in particular, loved him dearly and would spend hours at his side, reading to him, talking to him, and just whiling away the time. Also present that weekend were 2 of the Kennedy sisters, Jean and her husband Stephen Smith, who was the family's business manager, and Pat, who was now separated from her husband, actor Peter Lawford. Ted Kennedy, the only surviving brother and the senator from Massachusetts, was also home for the weekend, along with his wife, Joan, known as the Dish because of her striking good looks. There were several other relatives present for the festivities as well, such as cousin Joe Gargan, whose late mother, Mary Agnes, was Rose's sister, and who, along with his 2 younger sisters, had been raised on this same property by Rose and Joseph. Also present, close friends such as Lem Billings, JFK's prep school roommate, Senator George Smathers, JFK's best friend, and his wife, heiress Rosemary Townley Smathers, and of course, Roswell Gilpatrick, who had arrived with Jackie. Eunice Kennedy, Rose and Joseph's oldest child, was not present, as her husband, Sergeant Shriver, was now ambassador to France under President Lyndon Johnson's administration, and the couple was living for the most part in Paris with their 4 children. In the midst of all these Kennedys and their close circle of friends was one of the richest men in the world, Aristotle Onassis, doing his best to fit in, and not doing a bad job of it either. His old-world charm was truly hard to resist. Rose seemed captivated as he smoked a cigar and spoke grandly of his global travels and of Scorpios. "It would be my great pleasure to take you sailing on my yacht, the Christina," he told Rose, as the family sat on her porch chatting. "Oh my," Rose said, acting impressed. "That sounds marvelous." Though she acted as if she'd never been on a yacht before, of course that wasn't at all true, said Barbara Gibson. However, she seemed swept away by Onassis and couldn't help but enjoy a flirtatious moment or two with him. "Why, I simply wouldn't know what to do out there all by myself," she said, being very coquettish. "Oh, but I'll be with you, my dear," Onassis told her as he reached over to touch her hand. "You don't have to worry about that." Later she said to me, "If Jackie doesn't want him, I just may." It was all in good fun, though, but it does suggest that Onassis made a great impression on her. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what to make of him," Ethel Kennedy had said before Ari's arrival, deciding to fake a bad cold and stay in her home rather than participate in the family gathering. However, her children, at least 8 of the 11, were running all over Rose's house, causing chaos in their wake. Ethel knew that Bobby never trusted Aristotle Onassis, and the feeling had been mutual between them, and that he would never approve of Jackie's dating him. "I've known that bastard for years," Bobby once said of the shipping magnate. "He was a snake then, and he's still a snake. Other than his bankroll, I don't understand what Jackie sees in him." Therefore, Ethel couldn't understand how the rest of the family could be so welcoming of him. "I remember that weekend very well," said Larry Newman, who had lived across the street from the Kennedys with his wife, Mary Frances, known as Sancy. "I often saw Ari and Jackie walking along the beach, holding hands, looking very romantic. It was clear that there was a strong attraction, but also clear that Jackie was trying to move on. It was as if bringing him to this place the Kennedys considered hallowed ground was somehow cathartic for her, and maybe for the Kennedys too. Newman also recalled seeing Jackie and Ari dancing on the street in front of his house as if they didn't have a care in the world. No music, of course, just the 2 of them in each other's arms, he recalled. And I thought, okay, maybe I get it now. She had been so unhappy after the assassinations. This man brought romance back into her life. And yes, maybe he wasn't that attractive. And yes, maybe he had a checkered past, but it was what it was, and it was apparently working for her. You would see them kissing openly, and you'd think, well, this is definitely a different kind of homecoming. I certainly never saw her do that in public with Jack. Jack was very much a Kennedy, a little uptight, not demonstrative with his feelings, at least publicly, and so was Jackie. But Onassis was very emotional, and he brought something out in her. When you saw the 2 of them kissing, you felt that there was something strong between them. I think in the end, everyone just wanted happiness for Jackie. And that weekend, a lot of us saw that she was, once again, happy. When I saw her that weekend, I told her, "You look happy, Jackie, are you?" And she smiled and said, "Yes, I truly think I am." And I believed her. But it was sad just the same, not easy at all. I remember thinking, Camelot is over. Long live the king. Ted Kennedy felt the same way, at least according to what he told George Smathers that weekend in Hyannis. That very day, Smathers had informed Ted that he'd decided not to run for Senate again at the end of the year. He had been in the United States Senate from Florida since 1951. Ted hated to see him go, The two had been great friends for a very long time. They were catching up on each other's lives while sitting on rocking chairs on the expansive porch and taking in the magnificent seaside view when Ted suddenly observed, "Having that guy here, it's hard, isn't it?" "Onassis?" Smathers asked. "Yeah," Ted said. "He's a crook, you know. Bob hated him." Smathers, according to his memory of the conversation, agreed. "Bob would hate this whole goddamn thing, wouldn't he?" he asked. "Are you kidding me?" Ted said. "If Robbie was here," he added, using his pet nickname for his brother, "he'd sneak into Onassis's room tonight and strangle the bastard in his sleep." The two men shared a good laugh. After reminiscing a bit more about Bobby, they let the subject turn to Jack and then to Jackie. As they talked, it became clear to them that what was really bothering them wasn't Onassis's background. It was simply the idea of handing their beloved Jackie over to him. After all, Jackie had been a member of the family since Jack took her as his bride 15 years earlier in 1953. She was such a vital link to Jack and to the family's memory of him that, as Ted noted, "I don't want to let her go. It's like saying goodbye to Jack all over again." George Smathers understood. After all, as one of Jack's very best friends, he had been a proud groomsman at his and Jackie's wedding, and even spoke on behalf of Jack at the wedding's rehearsal dinner and at the reception. He told Ted that while he was sincerely trying to cope with the rapidly developing situation involving Jackie and Ari, "I have to admit that when I first saw them together earlier, it tore me up inside." Ted nodded. "So what do you think she'll do?" he asked as he continued rocking slowly and gazing off into the distance. Smathers thought it over. "Well, to be honest with you, Ted," he said, according to his recollection, "I'm pretty sure she's going to marry him." Ted stopped rocking and gazed silently at George, a look of astonishment crossing his face. "Holy shit," he exclaimed. "This is unbelievable, isn't it?" George agreed. "I guess as long as she was single, she was still Jack's, and maybe," Ted said thoughtfully, "she was still ours. But now she's his," George said, finishing Ted's thought. "But now she's his," Ted repeated. There was a long moment of silence as the two men rocked in their chairs, lost in their thoughts. "We have to move forward, don't we?" Ted finally asked. "Well, my friend," George responded, "I'm afraid it's starting to look like we have no choice." "It's not going to be easy," Ted admitted. "I'll say," said George. Jackie's 39th. On the night of July 28, 1968, the Kennedys enjoyed a small family dinner party to celebrate Jackie's 39th birthday at Joseph and Rose's house on the compound. This rather informal gathering was certainly nothing like previous birthdays for the former First Lady on the Cape. For instance, 2 years earlier, at Jackie's 37th, the party, which would better be described as a gala, was hosted by Jackie's friend Paul Mellon, a wealthy banker. The guest list was an impressive who's who of political and entertainment notables, such as Jock Whitney, ambassador to the United Kingdom, publisher of the New York Herald Tribune, and one of the wealthiest men in the world, along with his wife, Betsy Roosevelt, the former daughter-in-law of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. William Averell Harriman, former governor of New York, as well as former ambassador to the Soviet Union and to Great Britain, was also at the Cape that weekend, along with his wife, socialite Marie Norton Whitney. William S. Paley, who founded the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, was present as well, along with people such as Broadway producer Mike Nichols and Jackie's hairdresser, Kenneth. There were more than 100 people present, all of them gathered to wish Jackie a happy birthday while being served the finest of seafoods and spirits. This time around, though, Rose Kennedy decided to keep it simple as family members convened in the huge backyard while busy maids served grilled fish, roasted potatoes, and for dessert, an apple pie made especially for the occasion, not by one of the cooks, but by Rose herself. Certainly, Rose wasn't at her best in the kitchen, but that she at least tried meant the world to Jackie. If I had known much farther in advance that Jackie was bringing Onassis to the Cape, do you think I would have had such a simple party? Rose asked her secretary, Barbara Gibson. It's all very pleasant, attractive, and practical, but far from elegant, she said. However, I think this is a side of the Kennedys he may find charming. After the meal, the family adjourned to the home's private movie theater to watch the Steve McQueen film, The Thomas Crown Affair. Then more drinks and food were served out on the porch as they all enjoyed the warm night air. Much to everyone's delight, Ethel Kennedy finally changed her mind and decided to join the family out on the veranda, marking the first time she would actually meet Aristotle Onassis. As it happened, Ted went over to Ethy's house and talked to her, telling her that he felt strongly that she should join the family. Ethel could never resist Ted. They had a very special relationship, and she would pretty much always do exactly what he asked. As for Ethel and Jackie, there would always be reports that they didn't much care for each other. Why were such reports so persistent? Probably because they were such different kinds of women, and likely because it was fun for people to pit them against one another, and also because Ethel did like to make fun of Jackie, but definitely not because it was true. After all, these two women shared something that no one else in the family could ever really understand. Indeed, that most people couldn't even fathom. They'd been forced to witness the brutal murders of their own husbands. It was a tragic way for fate to have bound them to one another, but bind them it did. They would always have a special relationship, no matter the gossip. My Ethel, Jackie wrote to her sister-in-law just weeks before this party. I stayed up till 6:30 last night, just thinking and praying for you. I know you aren't fond of Onassis, Roswell Gilpatrick told Ethel Kennedy when she arrived at the big house, according to his memory of that night. That's true, Ethel told him, but as long as she's happy, right? She asked, trying to lighten the mood. At that moment, Jackie walked into the room and over to the couple to greet Ethel. According to photos taken that night, housed in the Kennedy Library and Museum, Jackie was wearing a cherry red blouse and black cigarette slacks. Her coal-black hair was pulled back from her face with a scarlet-colored beret. Even when she was dressed casually, there was something special about her. The way she held her head, the graceful way she moved her slender body, it was all very contained and regal, her dark eyes full of enormous power, as always. Yet she was also very feminine, very girly. "Ethel," she exclaimed, "look at you! You got over your cold." The two sisters-in-law shared a secret look, as if in recognition that not only had Ethel been fibbing, but also that it was all perfectly fine. The two embraced. When Jackie finally introduced Ethel to Aristotle, the tension in the room was palpable. However, Onassis won her over easily. He somehow found a way to make her laugh, even though she had been so unbearably sad of late. Soon the two were getting along and even joking with one another. After this gathering, Ethel rarely had anything negative to say about Aristotle Onassis. When everyone else had retired for the night, Jackie and Ted went into Rose's living room and talked late into the night in front of a roaring fire. This despite the warm weather outside. It was then that Jackie told her brother-in-law that she had all but made up her mind. She was going to marry Aristotle Onassis. By all accounts, Ted did not try to stop Jackie or even attempt to change her mind. Like the rest of the family, he wanted the best for her. And he also must have known that Jack would have wanted him to be happy for her. Jackie said that she needed Ted's assistance, though. "There's something I need you to do for me," she told him. "Would you help me, Teddy? Please?" It was Jackie. Of course he would help her. Some enchanted evening. In August 1968, Jackie Kennedy and her children, Caroline and John, and her brother-in-law, Ted Kennedy, arrived on the lush Isle of Scorpios. The time had come to negotiate a deal whereby Aristotle Onassis would take Jackie's hand in marriage. Though it may have come as a surprise to outside observers, it was only natural in the world in which Jackie lived that money would have to change hands if such a momentous merger were to take place. Wealthy people like the Kennedys and Onassis were accustomed to monetary transactions in marriages, or even just because a birthday had occurred. For example, each of the Kennedy children received $1 million when they turned 21. Onassis gave his 2 children $5 million each when they turned 18. It was Onassis's idea that he would give Jackie a certain amount of money when they married. She didn't ask for it. That wouldn't have been like her. But she also didn't turn it down. That wouldn't have been like her either. Jackie was raised to appreciate affluence, and her love of luxury was well known. She'd always had money, and as she got older, she naturally became more focused on maintaining a certain lifestyle for herself and her children. Did she love Onassis? Yes, I believe she did, her friend Joan Braden said. But she was also a practical woman with practical concerns. I'm just going to stop here for a second and tell you who Joan Braden was. Really interesting character if you don't know. She was an aide to Nelson Rockefeller, and she was also a campaign staff manager on the campaigns of both JFK and RFK. And then she worked as a special assistant to the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs in the State Department for 2 years later on in the 70s, 1976 to 1978. And it's interesting that she was a very close friend of Jackie's, and it was at Jackie's personal request of LBJ back in 1964, Joan was named a trustee of the Kennedy Center. She said she wrote a letter to LBJ saying, I can't tackle this without Joan Braden. So Braden continues, she says something to me like, "The first time you marry, it's for love. The second time, it's for security." Obviously, she was one of the most famous women in the world. She told me she was not going to wind up with a plumber in New Jersey. Onassis was one of the richest men on the planet, said to be worth more than $500 million. In that respect, he was suitable for her, yes. She loved to spend money, as we all know. Her mother, Janet Lee Bouvier Auchincloss, who I knew well and interviewed for her 1964 oral history at the Kennedy Library, placed a premium on wealth, and she passed that on to her daughters, Jackie and Lee, the sense that money mattered a great deal. So Jackie was very extravagant, but she was also pragmatic. She told me, "Life is all about change. The only constant we can count on is that nothing is constant, and you can't depend on anyone but yourself," which, she told me, I have learned the hard way. Jackie said, "Oh, you don't have to make a financial arrangement," recalled the attorney representing Onassis's American money manager. And Ari said, yes, I do, my dear." And she said, "Oh, no. And he said, "Oh, yes, I simply must." And they went back and forth with this kind of silly exchange as if there was ever any question that he was going to give her money when they married. He looked at it as a wedding gift, as did she. Of course, it would be viewed as a cold, mercenary business transaction by most people, but not by the wealthy, What always complicates matters is that once it is established that money will change hands, even as a gift, attorneys and managers and family representatives then get involved, then it truly does become a business transaction. The admittedly strange marital negotiations took place on Aristotle Onassis' cruise liner, the Christina, which was docked in Scorpios. The night before Ted's meeting with Onassis, a Greek reporter named Nikos Masterakis sneaked aboard the yacht, posing as the manager of an Athens bouzouki band that Onassis had hired for the entertainment. Masterakis recalled Ted acting like a laughing cowboy from Texas. All, including Jackie and Ari, seemed pleased with their lives, added Masterakis. They ate black caviar and red tomatoes. Ted drank orzo. Jackie, who was resplendent in a red blouse and a long gypsy skirt, preferred the vodka. She leaned close when Ari whispered in her ear. At dinner, Onassis ate his lamb like a youth. She ate little and nibbled white grapes. But at 4 a.m., with the moon above, the sweet Mrs. Kennedy sang "Adios, muchachos" with Ari. I felt they were very close. It had been an intensely romantic evening, even though the scenario made for an odd juxtaposition to the business at hand, which concerned the exchange of money for a bride. There was still something beautiful, magical, and even wondrous about it. A full moon glistened over the peaceful waters. The air was cool, everyone's spirits warm. In fact, Jackie would recall it as being one of the loveliest nights of her life. Of course, it couldn't end without Ted breaking out in song, as he often did on special occasions. Weddings, funerals, birthdays, anniversaries, and all sorts of family gatherings tended to find Ted leading a group in song, and tonight would be no exception. The number he selected could not have been more appropriate. To the strumming accompaniment of one of the musicians, he began to sing the song "Some Enchanted Evening." While he certainly didn't have what one might consider a great voice, Ted had a sincere tone and so much heart that his singing was always hard to resist. As he sang the tune from South Pacific, Jackie looked lovingly into the eyes of the man she would soon marry. After a moment, she began to sing along with her brother-in-law, and then, one by one, everyone on deck joined in, until by the time Ted got to the bridge, just about everyone was singing. The next day, in his meetings with Aristotle Onassis, Ted Kennedy made it clear that Jackie Kennedy was widely considered an American treasure, especially given what she had endured with the president's assassination and the manner in which she had handled herself at his funeral. It would take, as Ted put it, according to most accounts, a leap of faith for Americans to accept her as the wife of Onassis. "We love Jackie," Ted said, "and we want the best for her." Onassis agreed. He loved her too, he said. Rather than be insulted by Ted's suggestion that he was not good enough for her, Onassis was bemused, especially when Ted let on that by marrying him, she would be forfeiting her $175,000 a year stipend from the Kennedy family. The shipping magnate couldn't believe that the wealthy Kennedy family was only paying a woman they held in such high esteem a measly $175,000 a year. When Ted pointed out that Jackie would also be losing her $10,000 a year annual widow's pension, Onassis was truly gobsmacked. The figures Ted was using were such small potatoes to the shipping magnate, he was baffled as to why they were even being discussed. He said he would pay Jackie much more to be his wife, and after some give and take, the amount he and Ted eventually settled on was $1.5 million. "I believe that's a fair deal," Ted said. Onassis said that he wanted the wedding to take place in America, a suggestion at which Ted balked. Even though Ted wasn't opposed to the marriage, he said he wasn't going to put his family in the position of having to attend a big, well-publicized ceremony. It would just be too sad. No one would have been able to get through it. It would also be completely inappropriate, he said. I won't be moved on this point. Therefore, Onassis reluctantly agreed that the ceremony could be held in Greece. With a deal now struck, the two men shook hands. When Ted told Jackie about the terms, she was perfectly happy, saying, "Ari is a very sweet and generous man, and I'm very lucky to have him in my life." Ted then sent a deal memo outlining the terms to Jackie's business manager, Wall Street investment banker Andre Meyer. It was then that matters got dicey. French-born Andre Meyer was a close friend and business associate of the Kennedy family, first through Sergeant Shriver and then as a business associate of Stephen Smith. He was also a senior partner of a preeminent financial institution whose origins dated back to 1848. The firm provided, as they still do today, advice on mergers and acquisitions, as well as asset management to corporations, partnerships, and individuals. Coincidentally, Meyer and the John Fitzgerald Kennedys were in residence at the Carlisle Hotel in New York in 1961 at the same time, with Meyer in a suite directly below Jack and Jackie. In October 1963, Kennedy named Meyer to a committee that was to investigate ways the country could cut its balance of payments deficit. A year later, Stephen Smith, who handled most of the family's business affairs via the Kennedys' company, which was called innocuously enough Park Agency, Inc., brought Meyer in to help manage the Kennedys' huge holdings of more than $150 million. An eventual board member of the John F. Kennedy Library, Meyer also managed its $60 million building fund. A well-respected financier called by David Rockefeller the most creative financial genius of our time in the investment banking world, Andre Meyer often escorted Jackie to events after JFK's death. Jackie viewed Meyer, 30 years her senior, more as a father figure than a possible romantic partner. That said, his friends all knew that he had a crush on her, as did most men who had anything to do with her. He was certainly as much a sounding board and confidant for her and other members of the Kennedy family as he was a business advisor. He could often be found at Jackie's home in New York, helping John and Caroline with their homework. He was that close to the family. So when he took issue with something having to do with Jackie, it was dealt with very seriously. I also want to pause here for a moment and point out that Meyer was also a close friend of LBJ, President Lyndon Johnson. And he was invited to the White House, let me look, a total of 24 times between 1964 and 1968. Meyer was no fan of Ted Kennedy's, though. That much was clear to everyone in the Kennedy family. He felt that JFK and Bobby had the brains, and maybe Ted had the good looks, but that was it, said Mona Latham, a close friend of Meyer's, who first worked for him as a securities analyst and then as his assistant. When he got the deal memo from Senator Kennedy relating to the Onassis-Kennedy merger, he hit the roof. He called Jackie, who was still in Greece, and said he needed to see her immediately upon her return. So, about 2 weeks later, he and I met with her at her home on Fifth Avenue. Or I should say, I went with him but waited in another room as the two of them met in the study. According to Mona Latham, when Jackie greeted her and Meyer in early September 1968, she was in a bad mood. "Everything is going wrong today," Jackie said as she stood in the doorway with Latham and Meyer. "I don't think I can take any more bad news today. I'm having budget problems around here, as you know." Jackie then began to explain to Meyer that Stephen Smith had come to visit her earlier in the week to ask her to cut back on her expenses. She said that it was a humiliating conversation, but that she should not have been surprised by it. "The Kennedys can't support me forever," she said, "and Rose has made that very clear. They have even cut Ethel back, and she has all those kids." Actually, cutting Ethel Kennedy back was easier said than done, and if Jackie knew how much Ethel spent on food and clothing, she might have been surprised and perhaps even upset. Mona Latham would say years later that she was astonished by Jackie's financial situation as outlined by her and Andre Meyer that day at Jackie's. Apparently, JFK had left her about $70,000 in cash, plus all of his personal effects. There were 2 family trusts valued at about $10 million, but due to certain restrictions placed upon them, Jackie wasn't able to access any money from them and was instead living on the annual allowance of $175,000 from the Kennedys. It had originally been $150,000, but Bobby managed to get her another $25,000 a year from the family before he died. Jackie's household staff included 2 maids, one responsible only for Jackie's needs, a nanny, a cook, and a governess for the children. Each staff member made $100 a week, and Jackie also had a personal assistant, Nancy Tuckerman, who was making roughly $200 a week. The total household budget, including food, wine, liquor, and salaries, as well as entertaining, came to $1,600 a month. Meanwhile, Jackie spent money on clothes and jewelry as if she were a very wealthy woman. "And that's where all my money's going, I admit it," she told Meyer. "But I am expected to have nice things, Andre. And so yes, I buy nice things, I admit it. What can I tell you? I like nice things." "And you should have nice things," Meyer told her. "You deserve nice things." "Thank you," Jackie said. "I agree with you." As Jackie spoke, she fumbled while trying to insert a cigarette into a long black cigarette holder. She picked up the interphone. "Olga, would you please come here?" she asked. Today, her guests were definitely seeing a more imperious side of Jackie. Though she was usually quite down to earth, she did have her moments. Within seconds, a small Greek woman appeared, and without saying a word, the former First Lady handed her the cigarette and the holder. The woman put it all together with nervous hands and then gave it back to Jackie. Jackie held it in her lips while the servant lit the cigarette. "Thank you," Jackie said as she inhaled. Then, exhaling a puff of white smoke, she turned back to Andre Meyer and Mona Latham. "So anyway, I simply have to do something," she said. "When Jack and I were in the White House, I didn't have these problems." She said that the last 5 years had presented nothing but headaches for me. "And I can tell you this much," she said with a determined look. "I will not live like this, Andre. I just won't do it." "Well, that's why I'm here today," Meyer said, as Jackie took a finger sandwich from a plate someone on staff had arranged on the coffee table. When he said he wanted to talk to her about the Onassis matter, Jackie slowly placed the sandwich back on the platter and gave him a look. "I would prefer that you not refer to it that way," she told him. "It is not a matter. That is so boorish, Andre," she said. He explained that he was only trying to be discreet, but Jackie shook her head in the negative. She then stood up and suggested that Mona Latham enjoy the lunch that had been prepared while she and Meyer went into the study to chat. The 2 left the room. When Jackie and Meyer returned 30 minutes later, Jackie was clearly still not happy. "So I'll get back to you then, okay?" Meyer asked as he went to embrace her. She was stiff in his arms. "Fine, fine, fine," she said, obviously anxious for him to take his leave. "Goodbye then," she added, the severity of her expression unchanging. She then turned and walked away, leaving her 2 guests to find their own way out of her apartment. In the taxicab on the way back to their office, Mona Latham asked Andre Meyer what had occurred between him and Jackie Kennedy that had made the former First Lady so cross with him. Andre said that he told her he was very much against the marriage, Latham recalled many decades later. He said that he knew Onassis quite well and thought he was a crook. "You are America's First Lady. You can't be seen with this man, let alone marry him," he told her. As I understand it, Jackie listened because she had respect for Andre, but she wasn't going to be dissuaded, and more than that, she was insulted. Meyer brought up the fact that Onassis, who married his first wife, Tina, in 1946, was known to have been openly having an affair with the married opera star Maria Callas. It was considered one of the greatest love affairs of the 20th century, right alongside that of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And it also matched the Burton-Taylor affair as a tabloid-fueled scandal. Jackie was not moved by Meyer's reasoning, though. "Everyone has a past," she told him. Finally, Andre said, "Then at least let me work out a better financial arrangement for you." Jackie said she was satisfied with what Ted had come up with and feared that Onassis would perceive their going back to the negotiating table as advantage-taking. "But yes," she decided, "if there's more we can do, I suppose we should try." Finally, she agreed, as long as Andre could promise that none of these negotiations ever made it into the press. "You must act with great discretion," Jackie said. "The public images of many people could be hurt by such maneuverings, not the least of which is mine." Andre said it was all very civil between him and Jackie until he crossed a line with her and said something like, "Do you really think Jack would approve of such a marriage?" That's when Jackie became upset with him. "How dare you talk to me in this manner? Who do you think you're talking to?" she demanded. He apologized, but she didn't want to hear anything more from him at that point. He knew he had gone too far. The meeting then ended. He wasn't happy about the way it had gone. He hated disappointing Jackie. All he ever wanted was to protect her. He was being candid with her, but maybe a little too much so. The next day, Meyer sent Aristotle Onassis a counteroffer, $20 million. Onassis was angry. After all, he and Ted Kennedy had already agreed in principle on an amount that was far less. He immediately arranged to fly to New York, and the two met on September 25th, 1968, at Meyer's apartment at the Carlisle. According to someone with knowledge of the meeting, Onassis first approached Meyer as if he were Jackie's father and was asking his permission to take her hand in marriage. "I love her very much," he told Meyer, "and she's in love with me. So what will it take for me to make her my wife? What would it take?" Meyer repeated the figure, $20 million. Onassis said that he thought the price was ridiculously inflated. The two of them haggled over it for about 2 hours. Afterwards, Onassis went back to his hotel room at the Pierre Hotel. He was very unhappy. As I understand it, he asked his secretary for a drink. She pulled out a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label and poured him a double. Then he dictated a letter to his lawyer. That correspondence from Onassis to his lawyer memorialized the shipping mogul's discussion with Andre Meyer. However, Jackie was not mentioned by name, but was instead referred to as the person in question. It said, in part, the sum of $20 million indicated in the meeting as a capital, apart from the fact that in the final analysis it would be futile due to gift, income, and other taxes that it would necessarily entail, apart from being detrimental to the feelings of either party, it might easily lead to the thought of an acquisition instead of a marriage. When Andre Meyer went back to Jackie Kennedy with the New Deal memo, she wasn't at all pleased with the language. It sounded like a cold business deal to her. Of course, that's what it was, but seeing it in black and white was a little unsettling. Meyer spent a few days trying to convince Jackie that if they pushed a little harder, they could probably get $10 million from Onassis. He reminded her she was the one who had been complaining about money in recent years and suggested that this was her opportunity to straighten out that problem. She had to agree. Still, she was ambivalent. Of course, she had her eye on the financial security she could gain by marrying someone like Aristotle Onassis. However, he was the one who had first offered to give her money upon their marriage. She had her limits in terms of how much she would exploit his generosity. Actually, Jackie was walking a thin line. On one hand, she seemed to want to appear as if these negotiations repulsed her. But on the other, she did want the money, and she couldn't deny it. As long as he agrees to pay all of my expenses during the marriage, she said, I don't see what the problem is. But yes, she decided, go back and see if you can get $10 million. But then that's it, Andre, she said, drawing a line. Meyer came back to Jackie a couple days later with the slightly disappointing news that he could only get the figure up to $3 million. As well as that lump sum, she would receive $30,000 a month, tax-free, for the duration of the marriage. Also, each of her children would receive $1 million, the annual interest of which would go to Jackie. I should also point out that John and Caroline also had trust funds and inheritances from the Kennedys of about $3 million apiece. Onassis would also pay all of her expenses over the $30,000 she received monthly, which, as he would learn, would be a sizable commitment. However, she also signed a provision that would limit the amount of money she could receive at his death, which probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. I was surprised that Andre Meyer agreed to that, recalled Mona Latham, and so the deal was struck. Now, that's it, Jackie said. Let's just leave it alone now before Ari gets the wrong impression. On October 15th, 1968, the announcement was made with a headline story in the Boston Herald. John F. Kennedy's widow and Aristotle Onassis to wed soon. That morning, I got a phone call from Steve Smith, recalled Pierre Salinger, JFK's former press secretary. I'm not sure how we should handle this goddamn thing, Steve said to me. I guess we need to make a statement about it, though. I asked him, so do you know what you want to say? And he thought about it for a moment and came back with, how about, oh shit. 5 days later, on October 20th, 1968, Jackie Kennedy took Ari Onassis as her husband on Onassis's private Greek island, Scorpios. 3 days after that, the deal Jackie made with Aristotle Onassis for her hand in marriage was signed. And that is Chapter 1 of After Camelot by J. Randy Taraborelli. I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to talk a lot more about the marriage between Ari and Jackie in future chapters. And in the next video, we'll get into Chapter 2 about Eunice Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver, which is actually probably my favorite chapter in the book. You'll find out why when you tune in. I'm Lori Spencer. Thanks for listening.